Okay, class, today what we're going to work on is finishing up this figure painting. It's the last session, so we need to refine what exists. Before we start, we need to do a few things. So one, I put out my colors. These are the colors that I started with at the beginning of the painting. So I put them out, I refreshed them, and now I'm going to oil out the painting and let that set up. And then once I have all my materials, my brushes dipped in the medium, I'll start painting. So, and the important thing now is we're going to need to use a detail brush. We're going to need to make sure that not only the value is correct, but also the color. So before we were looking more at the actual value than color. When you oil out, you need to also make sure that the painting is dry. It looks like there's an area somewhere around here that's not completely dry, so it's picking up probably the background. So I'm not going to go over that area. You don't want your painting to be too wet as well, so be careful of not over oiling out. Looks like something in here is wet still. I like to give it a few minutes just to set up. Okay, so I've oiled it out. It's set up more or less. I'm going to take one of my brushes and I'm going to start with the detail brush. Whenever you're starting a sitting on a long pose, so this is considered a sustained pose, you're always going to, on the second sitting and any sitting after that, you're going to oil out. After you oil out and let it set up, then you're going to work on the drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and refine the shadow patterns. I'm going to put in a base coat wherever of shadow, sorry. So I want it to be flat. And I'm going to make sure that these things are now specific to what the end result is going to look like. So I do have a lot of glare on mine. I'm going to go over it, all the shadow patterns, clean up anything that I feel is wrong. One of the reasons why we want to do this is that it creates a richness and a better understanding of what we know about this figure, right? Each layer gets us closer to this truth. And even though the shadow pattern is going to change the color, I still want to create that richness, one. Two, I'm constantly trying to understand what I don't know. And all of this is going to get refined. So, some of this is way too dark. But I need to understand what base I'm working with. So, like for instance, in this foot area here, actually I'm going to go over this whole area. I want to understand that it is much darker than it is light. So I want that base coat to have the shadow, even though I may end up going over the entire section. And I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about. I want to make sure that these shapes are correct now. And don't worry if you do make a mistake. Like I made a mistake right here, right now. I'm gonna refine everything. So, you know, mistakes in a way are opportunities to correct. So if you do things too perfect, it becomes harder and harder to figure out, you know, what do I need to change? What do I need to correct? Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to start, you're going to work 2 by 2. So 2 brushes at a time. So let's start with this one. I'm going to put paint on all my brushes. It's real important that you follow this process because we don't want to end up massaging the same kind of color over and over and over again, or area. We need to actually move the painting forward. And the way to do that is to actually have paint on your brush where you're actually changing and refining things. Okay, so I have all my brushes now. I'll put this small stick down for just a second. So I put in my base coat. So in this case here, I do want to refine a little bit more here. I'm going to go ahead and actually do that. It's probably the limit of how low this painting should be for me. I don't want to paint down. I never want to paint down. I'd rather paint up than down. When you start painting down, you start getting into some problems. Now, because it's wet, and depending on the pressure, I can start blending in sections. Looks like this part of the knee is a little low, so I'm just going to take that out. Notice I am using the maul stick, and I want to just make sure that, okay, I find the correct location for the beginning of the patella. And actually this part here is where the tendon and the fascia, and the one below it is actually the kneecap. Now I notice that it's a little bit more red, so I'm literally getting red from my primary, and I'm going to put some red. I can also, I'm going to literally put some red right in there, and then I'm going to diffuse that. I'm going to go over it with, remember, 2 by 2. So if I go over that with my shadow color, you see it creates a different value. And then I can come back in and just key it up a little bit. Okay. So when it looks like this, I get a little lighter, so I'm going to go over it with the next value up, and then come back in shadow color, push that out, then come back in and start. So I'm thinking about the beginning of my brush stroke and the end of my brush stroke. Because I'm finishing now. I'm not going to go over that whole section. I'm not trying to keep this painting going and going and going. I'm trying to actually resolve any underlying issues. So, and hopefully at this point you don't have any proportional problems. Like this has gotten a little wide, so I would probably, well, I will go back in and when I work on the background and resolve that. It looks like there's also a little bit of red. So I'm going to put red. Again, I'm thinking of the brush stroke 2 by 2. So I was using the shadow color and the one value up. Now I'm going to go from the value, so let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I was on the 5th value. I'm going to go on the 4th one. So number 1 is the lighter one. So I'm going to go right over that. You can see that it does lighten it up quite a bit. And I'm going to go back to the number 5. And our goal is to get the values really close to where they should be. And then we're going to come in with the fan brush and finish it up. And if you've done your job well, it will all lock into place. Remember, I've got to be careful not to create too much value, high key in this area here because it's further away from the light source. Okay, that looks good. So when I go in with the fan brush, it's gonna blur and bond all those layers together. So if I've done a good job, it will all make sense. I'm going to go back in now and just key it up a little bit more. And I'm going to go back in with the background because since I'm finishing up this section. Now we can also say that this section is a little bit kind of looser, right? It's not necessarily realism per se, because we're leaving it a little impressionistic. All right, so, and it looks like I could probably cool off a little bit, so I'm gonna add a little gray, too much. So the reflective light, if I look at it, it looks like there is gray. And the goal is to get it the correct saturation and ultimately the correct value and color. But the saturation is the first thing because that's going to help me blend pretty much seamlessly. So in order to finish the painting, I'm adding from the primary colors that I have to the core mixture that I was using for this figure. That's how you do it. So now we're getting into these specific colors. Good. And with not so much effort, I'm able to get quite a bit of range and variation. So now I'm going to climb up to the next one. So I'm using 1, 2, 3. So value number 3 and 4. Actually 4 and 5, sorry. Climbing 2 by 2. First thing, saturation. Once that is where I need it to be, then specific color. Change directions. Now I'm going to go back to the other brush, clean up. Okay, fan brush. So let's bond this whole layer together, starting from up here. You can see, because the values were right on, it locked into place, nice. And I just have to come back in now and put in a color, couple of color notes in here. And that section is done. Now I'm going to merge the number 3 and 4 color, and I'm going to add some red. So what I'm doing now is bridging some of these, so I can go in any directions. Notice, so I've climbed up little by little the figure. I'm not going all the way up, I'm slowly keying up the painting. And as I'm going up, I'm asking myself now that I have the correct value, is the color correct? So in this case here, I see a little bit more yellow. And at this point too, you should feel how rich the painting is, or the paint. It should be relatively easy to glide and blend. I'm loading up the paint back on my brushes because I need to make sure that I'm still painting and not just massaging paint around from one area to the next. Okay, so done more or less the lower half. So I'm going to start working on the face and the arms, and I'm going to use a detail brush. So, and I also need to work on the hair. All right, so I've got the face more or less established. So now I'm just going to start teeing it up and adding a little more color. So there seems to be a little more yellow. I need to clean my brush a little bit in order to eliminate the darker tones that are on the brush. I'm just using the medium. We're almost done. So I'm going to go in with some pure yellow. Some red. And then start blending it. Because I have a good base, I'm able to put, that was pure red on there, but my brush has got already the lighter value. 1, 2, I also have paint on the canvas. So all of those are helping me create not only easier transitions, but new colors. I'm going to go in with some red and yellow.